My next guest on the program is Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal Party president. Thanks very much for your time. The last time we spoke on the program, Michael, you're pretty dismissive of the scandal surrounding Bridget McKenzie, suggesting it was, not a scandal at all. Was the Prime Minister wrong then to refer it to the head of PM&C?
Well, I wasn't dismissive of it. I just basically said that politicians act politically, Tom, and giving out grants to local associations in marginal seats has been going on forever, in the same way that the Gillard government gave huge amounts of money to candidates or members of parliament in seats that were propping up her government. So I was just saying this is par for the course for politicians. So what's happened is it's been now referred to the department, and the questions for Phil Gaetjens, the Secretary of the Department, Tom, is whether the donation to the Wangaratta Clay Shooting Association, or similar name to that, is a breach of ministerial standards. I think that's probably the central question he's looking at now.
But just to that previous question, you were saying that this is just what happens in politics, politicians being politicians. So wouldn't that mean that the Prime Minister overreacted by sending this off to Phil Gaetjens? Why couldn't he make a call?
No, because what's happened in the last week, as we know, is that there's been this allegation of a conflict of interest, that there was a membership of an organisation which was undeclared allegedly, and a grant went to that organisation. Therefore, does that constitute a conflict of interest? I think that's probably the main issue that's been looked into. Except the PM
made that referral before that came up.
Well, given the fact that the Auditor-General made some criticisms, it's not inappropriate that this matter be looked at. I mean, people are complaining about government decisions all day long. So was there a breach of the law? Was there interference in Sports Australia's right to make these decisions themselves, etc.? So given you're spending $100 million of the taxpayers' money, there's no serious issue in having this matter referred off for an investigation. As we know, Mr Gaetjens will give a report to the PM the next day or so.
But the way you were talking about it last time, it didn't sound like you were keen to refer it off. If you were Prime Minister at that moment, Michael Kroger, is that fair to say you wouldn't have referred it?
Well, I think it would have, given the Auditor-General's report, and that's the issue. But the real thing we're looking at here is, Tom, is you get people in the Labor Party complaining about what happened, we complain about what they do. If you're going to have a situation where ministers make decisions and are entitled at law to make decisions to favour marginal seats, before elections, then everyone's done it for a long time. I think I made the point it wouldn't be allowed in the corporate sphere to favour one shareholder over another, but this is what politicians do. And as I said, the Gillard government made an art form of providing extra funding to Andrew Wilkie and all sorts of MPs who were keeping their government in power.
So when you say this will hinge on what happened with this Wangaratta Shooting Club, the membership that she was given, what does it hinge on exactly, specifically in regards to that?
Well, I would assume it hinges on, and we don't know the full details, but I would presume it hinges on the fact that a minister has to act reasonably under the Code of Conduct without any perceived or actual conflict of interest, and given that Bridget was a member of that organisation that subsequently received a grant, the question is whether there was full disclosure of the fact that a grant was being made to an organisation of which she was a member, albeit, what was it, $150 or $180 the membership, and there was no personal benefit to her or perception as personal benefit to her. So I presume that's what the investigation is hinging on, Tom, and as I said, we'll hear more of that in the next couple of days, I think.
Yeah, so and our understanding from that is that she declared she's a member of Australian Clay Target Association, but not the shooting club specifically. Where does that leave her?
Yeah, well, the Wangaratta organisation is the one that received the grant. So the question is first of all, was it disclosed? And we don't know the full details, yes, but if it wasn't, does that constitute a conflict of interest? Does that then constitute a breach of the ministerial standards, and if so, what then flows from that?
All right, well, information coming to light from what we were hearing earlier from Andrew Clennell. Could be the next day or two, we will see.
Yep.
Wanted to ask you about Michael O'Brien's comments. Michael Kroger, in that state, the head of the leader of the opposition there in Victoria, says the federal government should have this long-term climate change emissions reduction target. What did you make of those comments?
Well, look, Michael was just contributing to the ongoing debate about where we are in relation to targets. You know, some people think that the targets should be 2030 and that's far enough ahead. Michael O'Brien took the view that perhaps we should look even further, and there's nothing wrong with considering that as an option. I think for a lot of people generally, and I'm sure all of us on whichever side of the debate you're on, anything where you're looking at 10 years is a long time away, Tom, and so to go to 2040, 2050, you know, nothing wrong with having these aspirations, but the fact is so much changes within a year or so that, you know, you're going to come to the time when often a lot of those things are not met. But is there a problem in looking further down the track? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, look, I think you're right on aspiration. I guess on one hand, you do have to look at 2050 because that's what, and 2040 and beyond, that's what the IPCC does,
Sure.
and that's, you know, that goes to the Paris Agreement. But I take your point. I mean, these politicians won't be able to account as to what happens in 2050. What's interesting is having the federal government say to Matt Keane, and we'll see what happens to Michael O'Brien, hey, butt out, it's none of your business. But they're relying on the states, which are driving renewable energy, to help it meet its own 2030 target. The states are a huge part of that.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully Michael O'Brien will be Premier, so he'll be able to do something about it. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. You know, these are collective responsibilities, these things, and the states have a big role as well. They're huge employers, they're huge emitters through the range of companies and organisations and businesses that they run and conduct for the state. So they have a critical role in what's happening going forward. But as I said, this is, you know, this is an ongoing debate. We're not static in any sense at all. I mean, who would have thought Prince Charles would go to that conference and praise Greta Thunberg? Well, actually, I suppose probably a lot of people did think he would, but anyway.
Yeah, interesting where they line up, because a lot of the people that probably don't like the Royals might like what they say on climate change.
Correct.
Michael,
Correct.
just finally, the polling initially after the bushfires suggested voters had significant anger towards Scott Morrison for his handling of the bushfires. Has that dissipated, or is this just sort of him getting back to at least normal and not going backwards anymore?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably right. It'll dissipate over time. I thought he was savaged way over the top. The criticism of Scott was highly exaggerated, Tom, as I said last week. But this is what happens. You sort of get this correction in the Australian media, don't you? If they think he's had an easy run sort of post-election, at the first sign of trouble, there's sort of this overreaction and he gets a mountain of criticism, which was extreme. So I think what we're seeing in Scott Morrison is getting back to normal. He shouldn't have taken that trip. He's acknowledged that, but he's been incredibly empathetic. And by the way, there he was yesterday, continuing to hold a meeting with Indigenous leaders, a very important meeting. I spoke to someone who was at the meeting, said Morrison put in a tremendous performance, and his father had passed away the night before, but Scott Morrison felt it was critical as a matter of respect to show up at that meeting and concentrate 100%. And my contact was at the meeting, said he did, and he said it just shows what a PM is. But anyway, I thought it was the media basically correcting what they thought was an easy run that Scott had had from the election onwards.
All right, interesting take. Look, for what it's worth, I heard someone talk about the small business meeting that he had and saying he was very attentive, taking a lot of notes, more so than they have experienced previously with some leaders. So, look, we tell things, some not so flattering reports from the inside sometimes. So there you go, there's one where he was praised. Michael Kroger, talk soon. Thank you.